Welcome to 4,000 Weeks, the weekly audio dispatch from 4kweeks.com. I am Spencer, and it is week 32 of the year 2025. The first thing that I owe you is the setup to the dad joke of the week. Why shouldn't you write with a broken pen? Why shouldn't you write with a broken pen? That is the setup. We will get to the punchline at the end. In the meantime, week 32 of 2025 has arrived, and a cool breeze is blowing across the Midwest. And I seriously, it just happens over and over and over again, but I don't think I have ever heard people so thankful for 75-degree weather. It has been so hot in Kansas City for so long, and everyone, it's just like the thing that everyone is talking to their neighbor about is, whoa, sure is beautiful weather. And that's great. It's time for you to walk over to your 4K Weeks poster and fill in another square. Are you done? Awesome. So that's an important thing to remember, that everything is relative, and there's always something that you can find to be thankful for relative to some other situation, right? You know, it's been hot and now it's cool, and I'm thankful for that, right? It just is a good thing to remember to notice the improvement of situations, even if it's not totally improved, but it's better than it was. I had a fairly traumatic week last week. We'll get to more on that later. But I am so thankful today, and I was so thankful then, for the habit that I have been building over these last, probably like the last 15 years. 2025? Probably last 10 to 15 years. That I have created of finding all of the good things that are going on and not focusing on the bad things. I mean, really, there's always good and bad. And even in the best day of your life, there's some bad things too. And you could focus on those bad things if that's where your perspective is. And I hope you see the good in everything this week, because if you remember, that is a choice that you can make. It's like one of the only choices that you can actually make is what things to focus on. Let's see. If you have a minute, I'd love it if you'd subscribe, rate, and review. Send this podcast to a friend. Something that seems to matter. That would be spectacular, fantabulous. That would be awesome. Sorry if I sound a little bit tired today. We'll get to it later. I don't fully have my energy back. But remarkable weeks. Week 32. This one's kind of funny. Week 32 of the year 2009. Kesha released her hit song TikTok, which became the Billboard Song of the Year in 2010. She was 1,170 weeks old, or 22.45 years. I often think about pop stars and athletes and people who have fame. They're examples to us that there is no standard pace. There's just the pace that you're on, right? 22.45 years old. It's pretty insane. The quote of the week: "Problems are only opportunities with thorns on them." That is from Hugh Miller. Problems are only opportunities with thorns on them. And I've told you this before. If you remember, Eli chooses the quote of the week. We've got a big spreadsheet that goes, for the email each week. And I think it is kind of insane. I don't think she chose this one on purpose, because typically we're, 2 months ahead in the spreadsheet. Maybe she did. But it is such a fitting quote for her to have chosen. I will keep this brief because the rest of the email and the rest of the newsletter podcast is so long. But this week, as I was faced with some of the stiffest headwinds I have dealt with in a long time, I said out loud to myself and to my wife a couple of times some version of, "I am so grateful for this opportunity to test, under real-world conditions, whether or not I am actually the man that I say that I am. I'm so thankful for this opportunity." It doesn't mean this opportunity wasn't thorny. It doesn't mean the opportunity didn't hurt. It doesn't mean that I didn't fall short of seizing the opportunity for every, once in a few moments, right? And have to remind myself, hold on, this is an opportunity, right? But the framework is an important part of how you view the world, right? You cannot see things that do not fall within your worldview as clearly as things that are mapped to the way you are seeing the world. And so if you see everything as an opportunity, whether it's a difficult opportunity or an easy opportunity, or a thorny opportunity or a flowery opportunity, then you will treat it as such. And I just am so thankful for all the work I've been doing. And it's also nice to know that the work we all do on ourselves all the time occasionally pays off. Let's get to what I consumed this week real quick. I've got a couple things in here. Hidden Brain podcast with Shankar Vedantam. This was on the Revisionist History feed, and I listened to it, and it was so good, so spectacular. It's that podcast itself, all of them are just so thoughtful and interesting. I have also been watching lately YouTube videos about hypercars and supercars with my son, and the only reason I put this in here is because I think often it seems like all the stuff I'm consuming is really like lofty and heady and thoughtful, and sometimes it's awesome just to sit with your kid and watch the thing they're enjoying. And there's this BMX guy, former BMX guy, his name's like Matt Chapman or Matt Coleman or Matt something. And he buys totaled supercars and repairs them. And he's from Great Britain. And he's got a spectacular accent. And I didn't want to like him, but he's just so earnest and just so joyful that it's really fun to watch with my son. That is it for what I'm consuming this week. We're going to move directly on to what I'm thinking about this week, because it's kind of a doozy. I think it felt really long when I wrote it, but that could just be because of the headspace I'm in. So what I am thinking about this week, so much. It's I didn't want to leave you with a to be continued, so we're going to get through all of it in one fell swoop here. I have taken note of a million different lessons over the last week. And actually, if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll be wondering what is wrong with me. Yeah, I'm sure some of the lessons I've taken note of over the last week will come out later. It's very hard to appreciate each drop of water when you are drinking them from a fire hose. But the TLDR of this, just so you can't accuse me of being clickbaity, or whatever the new version of clickbait is. I shattered my arm on Tuesday morning at basketball. Well, I didn't do it, but it happened. And I've never broken a bone before, and that's not for lack of trying. I have been injured quite a bit, lots of sports, lots of diving for balls, and lots of football plays and dislocated shoulders and things, right? But when I thought that was always interesting. Maybe everyone doesn't break a bone, but in fact, when my dad had his hip replaced at 80, the surgeon, after a much longer surgery than we expected, came back afterwards and said he was sorry, but it was so long. He had to go get a different sized hip replacement because my dad had the bone density of a 40-year-old at 80. And so because of that, I've often been quoted as saying Schuberts don't break bones. Well, that is no longer true. Here we go. It was early on in the first game. I was on defense, and the guy that I was guarding kind of lost his handle on the ball, and suddenly the ball was loose. And a few of us were on the ground scrambling for it. And I got my hand on the ball, and I take pride in my ability to come up with loose balls, and also the fact that at 48 I'm still willing to go get a loose ball. But then, after I got my hand on the ball, the 230-pound guy that I was guarding flopped over onto my arm, shattering it. I heard it crack. And I immediately yelled, you broke my beep, boop, beep arm, and clutched it to my chest, while I was laying on the ground, just like, through gritted teeth, right? And as I was laying there, I remember thinking to myself, frankly, in between moments of bewilderment, right? Because Schuberts don't break bones. Like I've said a million times, I can't believe I actually broke my arm. It's just kind of surprising to me that it's a thing that I did. I don't know. I felt like Bruce Willis in that movie Unbreakable or something. So as I was laying there, I remember thinking to myself, this is the moment that I've been training for. And I remember thinking that like the way that I act now is who I am. Because everything's stripped away, right? There's nothing, the only thing I'm in self-preservation mode at this point, right? And so I sat up, still holding my arm across my chest. I took some deep breaths to steady myself, just to kind of make sure I wasn't going into shock, make sure I wasn't going to get up and then fall down, which is always very important if you're injured. Often people are in such a hurry to get up that they don't realize they're going to get up and be lightheaded. And so then I asked the guys around me, everyone was kind of like, what's going on? Oh, you okay? What's the deal? I asked them if they could help me to the bench. And then once I was on the bench, I asked if someone could go get me some ice and if they wouldn't mind taping my arm to my body with the ice on it. And if somebody could then take me to the hospital. Basically, I'm the oldest one there. I feel very paternal towards all of these guys. Most of them are just starting their career where I am, near the end of my career. And so I was just kind of like leading them through, like, this is what I need. This is what I need you to do. This is what I need you to do. This is, here's what we're going to do. I didn't snap at anyone. I didn't blame anybody for what was clearly an accident. I was, I'm happy that I didn't do any of this. I wasn't short. I was pleasant with everyone. But most importantly, the thing that I am the most proud of myself for is that I didn't try to travel into the future. I didn't engage in any woe is me-ism. That's what I'm calling it, right? Oh no, I've got all this stuff to do. Oh, I can't break my blah, 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 And I'm sure this isn't surprising to most of you, but I use my right arm pretty dang regularly. And I consider it a high value property, right? Well, literally, I had to voice to text this essay for this newsletter, and this is my side hustle, right? This isn't even my main job. And I knew it was broken. I didn't know how badly it was broken. I didn't know if it was also my wrist or elbow. I mean, at that point, I could feel nothing other than, a decent amount of agony emanating from the area where my forearm was. But the thing that I'm the most proud of for myself is that I didn't for 1 second entertain any thoughts of, oh my God, this is going to suck. It's going to ruin so many things. How is this going to work? How's this going to work? How's this going to work? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I trudged my way out of the gym and down the stairs to my buddy Anthony's truck. Thanks, Anthony, for driving me to the hospital. And he drove me to the emergency room, which is about 10 minutes away. And another thought occurred to me as, I was, past level 1, right? We're out of the gym. We're on the way to the hospital. And I know I'm going to the emergency room. And this occurred to me as we're headed there. I'm going to be the kindest, most pleasant broken arm patient they have ever had. And that thought was born of two things. Number one, when injured, you often don't know how serious things are. And nobody wants to be the person who's making a big deal out of a scratch, right? The worst case scenario is that I'm like, oh my God, it's the worst thing in the world. And they're like, actually, you didn't even break it. You just sprained it real bad. And then second thing is that in that situation, being kind and pleasant and patient was something that was absolutely within my control. I was in pain, but it wasn't the kind of agony where I couldn't focus on anything else. So, we got there later, but this was something that was within my control, to be kind and to be patient. And sometimes when you find a situation that is largely outside of your control, focusing on one thing you can control, right? Your attitude, how you treat people, is super helpful to just your focus. Keeps you from spinning out into all of the different universes of possibility. So we get to the emergency room. Actually, it's kind of funny. As we pulled up to the emergency room, Anthony had to take a U-turn to get into like the drop-off area. And right as he was getting ready to make the U-turn, a trash truck pulled up and started backing down a ramp that was totally blocked our ability. So it was like an extra 60 seconds of waiting, because I can see in my mind, I can like see, okay, we're going to get this fixed. And then I had to wait one more minute, right? It was pretty funny. It was even funny at the time. I think I laughed. So they get me in a wheelchair. I say, thank you very much. And they wheel me through the metal detectors. And, I'm joking with the people. I get my license and my insurance card out of my, I think my buddy had those. So he got them out. And, we're having all sorts of small talk and banter through smiles and gritted teeth. And they're, asking me what happened. I'm like, I think I broke my arm playing basketball. And okay, great. And so let's get you back to triage. They get me back to triage, where because of the swelling, in my arm, at this point, it's been 25, 30 minutes since it happened. The nurse is just having a little bit of trouble finding a pulse in my wrist. I was still pleasant with her. We were still, talking. She didn't seem to be alarmed. And so I decided not to be alarmed. But that not being able to find the pulse got me back into a room pretty quick. And they they called the doctors in to come in and take a look. And at this point, my arm is still pretty straight, right? I'm laying on a bed and it's on my chest. It's swollen, but I don't know if it's clearly broken. Of course, I can't really see that, right? Because, at this point I'm being worked on. And on top of that, I'm cracking jokes with everybody. I'm being polite and pleasant. I'm apologizing when things are difficult because I'm in a little bit of pain, right? And just, I'm generally trying to be a sunny presence. Other than this, every once in a while, I kind of have to buckle down because it hurts or something, right? And I think that they maybe weren't sure what to make of it. And that actually makes me happy that I was able to have a good enough attitude when I was in, some pretty serious pain. I mean, probably the worst pain I've been in a while. And I'm, fairly familiar and comfortable with pain. So they bring the x-ray machine into the little room and they take the first x-ray. And I think that they really can't see anything crazy abnormal. At this point, they were just pressing the thing against my chest to get a side view or something. They didn't want to move my arm. And then they take the second x-ray and, they're standing in front of me kind of behind the thing. And, they do the click and then they look and, everybody is being cagey, right? Nobody wants to speak out of turn. Nobody wants to, the people who take the x-ray are not the people who read the x-ray, and they don't want to say, oh, it's broken if it's not broken. Everyone's kind of being, cagey is the right word, and in the most professional way. And, but suddenly both of their eyebrows go up and they're like, oh, and I'll say, if you want to see the x-ray, because it's something to see, nobody yet who I know who has seen it has not exclaimed. So maybe that's you. But it is in the reward for reading the email link in the newsletter this week. So you have to go to the email. You have to read the email. Go all the way to the bottom. There's a reward for reading the email. It's in a link at the bottom. It's not for the squeamish, I would say. So if you don't want to look at it, no judgment. But suffice it to say, multiple fractures, some tiny fragments, of bone in things. Later on, when I was in the hospital afterwards, after surgery and everything, the nurse said that in the surgery notes, they had to pick a few bone fragments out of my nerve clusters or whatever, which is why I was having a decent amount of pain. I will admit to being fairly relieved when they said that my elbow and wrist were, I think the word was grossly normal with some age-related degeneration. So 2 more things that I am thankful for. And then after that, with the IV and the occasional pain medicine, everything is kind of a blur. We play basketball early in the morning. I got to the hospital probably at like 6:45 in the morning. And I had eaten at 5:30 that morning. And so they couldn't operate on me until 1. So the second after, it was like 1:01, they rolled me back in. And the surgery took about 4 hours. And now my arm looks like Dr. Frankenstein cut it wide open on either side and stuffed a whole bunch of bicycle spare parts in there. There's this huge thing that kind of looks like a bicycle chain, which is like a reinforcing plate on both of my arms, and then a couple other little plates. Anyway, it's pretty insane. It's pretty insane that this is the thing that happened. And look, there's no question that this is not my preferred outcome. Right? I know I'm not going to be mealy-mouthed and be like, oh, well, it's, I was going to say a whole bunch of things, and I just edited myself 50 times just then. Anyway, there's no question it's not my preferred outcome. I would much rather have been fully productive this last week and a half. This happened a week ago Tuesday. I would much rather not have a difficult rehab ahead of me. I would much rather not be out of playing basketball for 3 to 6 months. I would much rather not be sitting here with my arm elevated, dictating this email into my phone. That's, of course, when I was writing the email. But I would much rather not. My hand hurts right now because it's so swollen. Actually, working on this, controlling the swelling, has been one of my main goals this last week. But I would much rather this not have happened, right? Obviously. But none of those things were for me to choose. Nobody said, would you like to break your arm this morning? Please check here for yes and check here for no. I didn't get to choose that. The only thing I get to choose is how I react. And now I will say here, I'll say this here in the podcast, and I didn't say this in the newsletter, but a lot of people are like, oh gosh, you're going to go back and play basketball? Yes, of course I'm going to go back and play basketball. Breaking your arm is not a prerequisite, or it's not a foregone conclusion to playing basketball, right? Machiavelli says I'm going to paraphrase this, every course of action is risky. And so when faced with that fact that no matter what you choose, there is risk, try to make mistakes of ambition as opposed to mistakes of sloth. I love playing basketball. It's keeping me young. It's keeping me young from a relationship standpoint. It's keeping me young from a fitness standpoint. You don't sprint as much as I do. And if you do, I'd love to talk about it, because if you're over the age of 40 and you think you sprint more than me, let's talk, because I'm interested in people who are not going gently into that good night and how they're coping with that. I'd love to talk with you, but most of you don't. And that's not good for you. It is good for me. And so, yes, absolutely, I am going to play basketball again. There is a reasonable chance that I will dive for fewer loose balls in the future, but I'm not willing to admit to that right now, because hustle and hard work and leaving everything on the court is a big part of who I see myself as, and I need to work on whether or not that's an essential part of who I am. But absolutely, I'm going to keep playing basketball. We're going to talk next week about the lessons, the physical lessons that I learned in this experience, I think. I got to witness a lot of things that I'm glad I got to witness people along. How am I going to say this? I got to witness a lot of people walking down paths that I have chosen not to walk down while I was in the hospital. And I'm going to hold some of you to account for that next week, because you can't tell me you're making the most out of your 4,000 weeks if you're not focusing on the health of your meat suit. Anyway, back to this. The only thing I get to choose is how I react. And I have to say that choosing to try to find the opportunities in this and choosing to gloss over or trying to ignore the difficulties as much as I can manage has made it much better. And I mean, look, I love my wife so much. She is my best friend in the world. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that this has been all rosy all the time. I have leaned on her shoulder a few times, totally exhausted, and said, I'm tired of it today, right? There were moments in the hospital where I said to her, I just am tired of this right now. I was in the hospital for 2 days because they couldn't get the nerve pain under control, largely because of the way that the bone broke into the nerves. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. But it was excruciating at moments, right? And so, yes, of course, I'm a human being. There were moments where it sucked and I said it sucked. There were moments where I didn't want to keep doing it. There were moments where I could not really wrap my brain around the fact that this was an opportunity. However, 90 to 95% of the time, I have done a good job of, before I open my mouth, remembering that this is an opportunity for me to choose who I want to be in the world in the face of, difficult circumstances. Certainly not the most difficult circumstances. There were people admitted to the emergency room that day at that same hospital in this big city who had much bigger challenges. There's a person admitted who broke her hip in a car wreck 15 minutes after I was admitted. That's harder, right? And so surely if a person can exist through that and come out the other end, I can choose to be a sunny, bright disposition in the face of a little bit of not my favorite thing. And that's it. That's all. It's the whole story of this last week and a half for me. It's the reason the email last week was a bit of a phone in, because I just was still. It's actually remarkable how 4 hours of surgery and 3 days and 2 nights in the hospital will suck the wind out of the most fit person you know. I'm still not 100% from it. And so that's why it's a teensy bit of phoning it in last week. Hopefully you didn't mind. Anyway, it's an opportunity, right? I really did need to work hard on my left-handed dribbling, which now I have 3 months to do, and maybe I'll go back to basketball as a southpaw. Maybe they'll all be amazed at my ability to go to the left instead of the right when I drive to the basket. That's it this week. And also, just to get ahead of this, thank you. I don't need anyone to send me an email with any condolences about my broken arm. I assume that you wish me well, and I am doing way better than fine. I would love for you to send me an email about you have made the most of a similar opportunity, or also, like I mentioned earlier, about how you are using the peak of your fitness over 40. Recovery is a difficult part with that. Anyway, if you know, you know. Let's see. What else? Oh, the dad joke of the week. I got to let this scroll past here. A few things. It's hard. Typing is so hard. You don't think about how much you use your right hand, your dominant hand, but typing is very difficult. Normally it takes me about 5 minutes to set up this podcast in the teleprompter and stuff. It took me about 20 today. So you can see the link to the x-ray of my arm in the email, and then also the dad joke of the week. Why shouldn't you use a broken pen? Why shouldn't you use a broken pen? Because it has no point. Okay, have a spectacular week. I hope you are able to see all of the thorny and all of the flowery opportunities for what they are, which is a chance to choose how you're going to react. Have a great week.